Let us pray. Grant us, we ask, to speak, to hear, and to learn, so that our fears may be banished, our minds may become enlightened, our faith be increased, and our steps directed towards you. Amen.
Amen.
Let me begin by saying that you'll notice in the bulletin I've changed the word sermon to share. And I've done that on purpose because I think my role is to simply share, maybe not simply, but to share ideas with you. The idea being not that you agree with me, so this becomes an ego thing, but can I get you to think about what I'm presenting? And if I can do that in this day and age when everybody's got their attention all over the place, if I can take some time to share some ideas I have, given where we are in our particular journey, if I can get you to think about that, and it seems to me that's the best I can do in this day and age. I do not see myself as being the be-all and end-all in the repository of great things. I see myself, like everybody else in this room or those watching, as somebody on a journey. And how can I share some things along the journey? And given the fact that I've had to do some specific reading on text and things like that, if I can somehow relate that to what we're all doing. So that's why the word is share. And that brings us to today. One of the things, it seems to me, is that you and I know that we tend to forget is labels today really, really are not helpful. In fact, I'm not so sure that labels have ever been helpful. I think of the word Hispanic. To non-Hispanics, everybody thinks Hispanic means the same thing. Anybody who's Hispanic knows that's exactly not true at all. There are Hispanic cultures. Chile is not Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is not Colombia. Colombia is not Venezuela. They're all very different cultures with very different languages, very different pronunciations of Spanish, very different vocabulary. Is that correct? We all know that. When you say liberal, what does liberal really mean? And I'm not sure that, for instance, that somebody can be liberal in everything. I was talking to my students about that the other day. For instance, I am liberal in terms of the way I view social things. I'm very, very big on women's choice, women being equal to men. I'm very, very big on LGBTQ issues. All of that I'm very, very liberal on. But I'm also very conservative on other things. I believe in rituals. I very much believe in rituals. I think the idea that we have a Jesus meal every time we gather, for those for whom it works, offers another chance to ground us one more time in something very simple, but it's continual. It's continual, whether it's nice out, it's not nice, it's something that grounds us. I believe in worship. I believe in gathering, whether it's that's very conservative. I believe in not being embarrassed about saying you believe in things. That's very, very conservative too. I worry about money in our congregation all the time. If I was a liberal, I would say God would provide. Well, I'm not that liberal. I read biblical texts. That's very conservative. And so when I saw that one of the candidates running for office for the presidency, quoting Bible scriptures, he and Stacey Abrams, I thought, well, it's about time that somebody realizes that biblical passages are not left to fundamentalists. So I'm not sure labels mean anything. The other thing that liberal often means is we believe in the infinite perfectibility of humankind. Well, I don't. And so that doesn't make me a liberal either. And so how do we approach Palm Sunday? That's where I'm getting to. Palm Sunday, on the surface, is this big Cecil B. DeMille production. And by the way, never underestimate how much people know about biblical things from TV or for the movies. Seriously, most of my students don't know anything about the Bible. When they take my world religion classes, what they know is what they've seen in movies and on TV. They don't have a clue what's in the text. So you get this idea that mobs showed up. Thousands of people, palms everywhere, trumpets, blasting, the whole stuff, this mob scene. You get the idea from people, oh, Palm Sunday is great, it's a little Easter. And then we've got Big Easter. Isn't that wonderful? You get this kind of sunshine, lollipops, rainbows. Isn't it wonderful? This big Palm Sunday stuff. Dr. Pangloss from Candide, all is for the best, and this the best of all possible worlds. I don't think so. The text itself shows that, number one, things that people don't realize Even though they know the Jesus story, I'm amazed at how many people don't get basics. Where was Jesus from? Does anybody remember where 99% of his ministry was done? The Galilee. The Galilee is not like living in Kendall, and Jerusalem is Miami. Not at all. Most people, by the way, nobody here, but most people in the United States are terrible at geography. There was a famous thing a few years back where graduating seniors in the United States were asked to identify the United Kingdom, and 68% identified it as France. You do realize the United Kingdom is an island. France is like on the mainland. If you look at a map, and nobody ever does this, the Galilee is up here. Between that is a place called Samaria, and down here is Judah. Judea has always been, and this is not meant to be diminutive, has been the small one of the bunch. During the great time of Israel and Judah, Israel was the big group, Judah was small. During the time of Jesus, the Galilee was, much to their annoyance below, the powerhouse. This had a ton of land to farm, big fishing at the end of the Sea of Galilee. It was an economic powerhouse and the trading from the Mediterranean. What did Judea have? A lot of sand. It had Jerusalem. It had olive orchards on the Mediterranean, and it had Jericho, but the rest were small villages and a lot of sand. They had Jerusalem in the temple, but in terms of money, they ran a poor second to the Galilee. The Galilee, you might want to know, was ethnically mixed and had been ethnically mixed for decades, for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. Big Greco-Roman city, Sepphoris, which is about 4 clicks away from where Jesus was probably born, Tiberias on the Sea of Galilee. The accent the Galileans spoke stood out. The way they dressed stood out. Their whole manner about them stood out. Let me ask this. Is Broward County Miami-Dade County? No. Not even close. Compare Weston to Kendall. I rest my case. It's not good or bad. I'm just saying. It's not the same. Multiply that by 10, and you have the difference between the Galilee and you have Judea below. So when Jesus comes, the couple of times he came to Jerusalem, he looked Galilean, he dressed Galilean, his Aramaic was a Galilean Aramaic, it was a patois, he spoke it with a Galilean accent, he stuck out like a sore thumb. You need to know that in Judea, the Jews in Judea prided themselves with a perfect Hebrew, perfect pronunciation, a certain way of dress, and a correct way of obeying the rituals and the commandments. The Galileans, not so much, they thought, because they're with mixed people, mixed crowds, spoke patois, and did everything kind of, well, it's so-so, it's no big deal. There was a tremendous cultural and religious difference between the two. Notice then that nobody seems to take this into account and don't seem to understand the friction between a Galilean, somebody coming into Judea. Number 2, palms. Anybody get the idea of palms? They were from the field. If somebody big and famous is coming in, do you go take stuff from the field and throw it on the ground? No. You have banners. You have all kinds of blaring trumpets. You don't have a beast of burden and things that, and who welcomed Jesus? Peasants. With the nobility there, with the upper class there, with the Pharisees there, with the Sadducees there. No, maybe 1 or 2, but these are common people, poor people. A beast of burden, some stuff you hacked, Mark, stuff you hacked from the field and threw down. This was not a great triumphal procession of some Roman procurator. This was a Galilean preacher who spoke to the peasants. One of the things is nobody seems to pick up. They talk about Jesus healing. Jesus was not famous in his day because he didn't go to the wealthy. There were lots of well-known healers in Jesus' day. They're written down because they went to the help of the wealthy. They were well-known. Jesus' ministry was to the poor, the people who hacked things in the field, the people who nobody cared about. No birth certificates were given, no death certificates. Nobody cared. That's who he grew up with. That's who he ministered to. And when he came to Jerusalem, the poor were the ones who welcomed him. A Galilean. Nobody seems to get this about Hollywood and all the rest of the stuff. Then what does he do? This Galilean comes in. He goes to the temple and throws over all the money changers, causes complete chaos, gets everybody ticked off. And he gets, of course, ticked off because the temple staff is all Judean, speaking the correct Hebrew, no patois, thank you very much, doing rituals the correct way. And who comes in? This Galilean with a patois, acting badly, very badly, upsetting our place. Now, that's some of the reality of what's going on here. And what about the crowds? Have you ever thought about the crowds of people? You see, when we talk about Palm Sunday as being that kind of little Easter, what did we forget between now and Easter? Friday. Friday. Remember the crowds. Were the crowds on the day he came in the same crowds that were on Friday? No. Oh, yes, they were. Yeah. Oh, yes. Yes, but you didn't know that. Which brings me to my thoughts about Palm Sunday without Cecil B. DeMille and all the TV. Number one, I take a look at Homo sapiens, and I have some annoying things to remind everybody. We're 98% chimpanzee. And that should be a great wake-up call to everybody who wants to think Homo sapiens are infinitely perfectible. I don't know if you've ever known anything about chimpanzees, but there are two basic kinds. Bonobos, which are sweet, loving, and cool, and really fun, are now almost extinct because they've been eaten for food in the Congo. I don't know if you're aware of this. Both Congos have had massive civil wars for the last 15 years. Roughly 10 million people have died. One of the great tragedies of humankind in the last 10 to 15 years. It's a breakover from Rwanda. Remember that genocide? This is the throwover that takes place. And it has been a tragedy. One of the tragedies, our great cousins, the bonobos, are almost gone. The other kind of chimpanzees are territorial, hierarchical, interested in authority, power, and control, and a lot of other things. Does that sound very familiar to everybody? Yeah. Looking for power, hierarchy, and can be very aggressive. Does that sound very familiar when you want to know why people act the way they act? Number two, if we had, and I do this in my classes all the time, if we had 5 zombies come in from that door there, do you want me to tell you what would happen? I'll tell you what would happen. Yes, somebody's laughing. They've got this. Would there be a great stampede for that door right there? Yes. I'll tell you what would happen. A couple of people would freeze, much to their horror. Freeze. You'd absolutely freeze. And you'd find out your bladder isn't as strong as you thought. You freeze. Some of you would be so far out, would somebody trip? Yeah. Would somebody get stomped on? Yes. And later on, those who are alive would find some way to blame the person who got stomped on, saying they should have been stronger, they should have been quicker. You would have blamed the person because you're feeling guilty and really don't want to talk about it. Then at some point, when we try to erase what happened, would anybody stop to think, hey, let's band together as a group? Would that be our first thought, and how can we protect each other? Or with the first thought, how do we get out of here? Precisely. Chimpanzee 101. I find it horrifying and amusing at the same time that the only people that would stand with me and die with me are my 2 dogs. Yes. Think about that. Even Clifford, as old as Clifford is, would be here. Bunny, Wizard, Sadie, your dogs would stay with you. They may die in the process, but is that a terrible thing? You can count on your hounds, but human beings are the first ones out the door. And then come up with all kinds of excuses later on, after the fact. Number 3, it seems to me when we take a look at those crowds, welcome, 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 and then, you're an embarrassment to us. You really got to die. We're very fickle. Have you ever noticed how fickle human beings can be? I'm not saying, and every one of us has been fickle from time to time. We've changed our mind. We can be short-tempered. Am I right? Every one of us. We're messy. We're messy in our emotions. Those are some observations. You have to agree with me. These are just some observations I draw. So I look at Palm Sunday. And what do I see? All of that. I see a peasant Galilean preacher who has worked for probably 3 years with peasants, trying to bring hope, trying to bring some sense of divine presence in really wretched lives, because nobody cares about them. They make up 80% of society, die all over the place, no birth certificates, no death certificates, trying to lay on hands for touching and healing and caring, and trying to talk about those who are bereaved, comes into Jerusalem and dies. And my suspicion is most people here don't really understand what the problem was with all of this. One of the big things has to do with money. And this is another thing that surprises me. Nobody ever looks at maps. 40 years before Jesus was born, Parthians owned Judea. They owned Jerusalem. So he says, so what? So as Parthians were the only empire that kicked Rome's butt regularly. I asked my students, what country lies to the southwest of Judea? Think of your geography. Egypt. Why was Egypt famous 2,000 years ago? The Nile was famous for its what fields? Wheat. Wheat was the oil of 2,000 years ago. It was the wheat fields of Egypt that supplied the bread and the wheat for the Mediterranean. Without the wheat fields, you're in trouble. Judea stands as a gate. So if the Parthians should ever invade, you get to let Egypt know. That's why the Romans were there. They couldn't stand the Jews. The Jews couldn't stand. It's about money. Do you think Antony and Cleopatra, do you realize how old they were when they had an affair? 2 old folks. Who cares about 2 old folks finding love? Who cares? They controlled the wheat fields. Money, folks, money. Jesus was crucified. Pilate didn't know beans about what he thought. Didn't care. What he knew was there were crowds that followed him, and there are people that were always ready to rebel, and you can't have any of that because we need to keep this gate closed. Does that make sense to everybody? Now you're looking at a much bigger picture, and you're getting human beings played right into, let's manipulate, let's do this so we can keep the money flowing. The wheat goes to the Mediterranean. So what do I get from all of this, from the Palm Sunday story? A share. Number one, we need to be honest. We need to be honest that people really don't understand the real Jesus because we never take a look. We don't take a look. We're too busy. And it's not a shame thing. This is not a shame thing. Most people don't have time. It's my job to help you understand historical geography, historical money, what the story was. That's my job. And if you haven't understood, that means people like me have not done a good job doing our job, honestly. So we need to be honest about geography and economics and the real stuff that goes on and how people interrelate. He was not one of them. He was from up there. It didn't work. Number two, it calls for humility. It calls for humility in understanding that we are not the be-all and end-all of things, that human beings are messy and we're fickle. And we need to be humble about that. The third thing I get is forgiveness. We need to understand, because we are not infinitely perfectible. We make mistakes. We're humble. We get caught up in things. We don't understand things. We act on emotions. That's all of us. We need to forgive each other. Because all of us were in that crowd when he came, and all of us were in that crowd on Friday. All of us. And so we need to be forgiven. Because that's what we are. We're not perfect. We're not perfect. We are what we are. And some days we're really good, and some days we're really not good, and we're messy. It's the way it is. And maybe Jesus came to shine some light to help us see a way. That's what I get for Palm Sunday. Amen.
Let us have a moment of quiet. And if you turn to video.